Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
I would like to see the city as a site, Bangalore as a site, which has seen protests in different ways. The first one I would like to bring in is when Saket Raj was shot by the police. All of us were waiting in Kalakshetra, like Ravindra Kalakshetra, where Samsa Bayalu Ranga Mandira, where his body was to be brought after the postmortem. But the police just took it and burnt it, and his body was not brought. In a way, I would say that that site, which is a protest site, was completely cheated by the state, by the police. And then I wrote a poem for Saket. And when it was published, the footnote was removed. I would like to play this poem. It was sung by Sunita Ananthaswamy, and me collaborated, and she sung it.
ಹಾಡು ಬಿದ್ದಾಗ ಕುಸಿದು ತತ್ತರಿಸಿ ಹಾಡು ಬಿದ್ದಾಗ ಕುಸಿದು ತತ್ತರಿಸಿ ನೆಲ ಹರಿದಿತ್ತು.
In light of the recent ruling from the Karnataka High Court that limits public protests in Bangalore to a designated space within one park in the city, subject to police approval, it is important to discuss how art can serve as an alternative medium for voicing dissent and fueling public discourse. In this episode, a panel will discuss the ramifications of the court's ruling and its impact on communities and talk about art as a potent tool for social change. Through their experiences, the panelists will demonstrate how art can amplify voices, provoke thought, and catalyze change even amidst growing restrictions on dissent. The panel consists of Shilo Shiv Suleman, an award-winning Indian artist whose work intersects magical realism, nature, technology, feminine energy, and social justice. Her creations include paintings, wearable sculptures, interactive installations, and public art rooted in pre-colonial Indian sensuality and earth magic. Her work has been featured by Vogue, BBC, Nat Geo, and others. Mamta Sagar, a poet, writer, academic, and translator writing primarily in Kannada on identity politics, feminism, and issues around linguistic and cultural diversities. She curates Kavya Sanjay, a community poetry engagement, and is head of studies of the creative writing program at Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design, and Technology. Vinay Sreenivasa is an advocate who works primarily on constitutional literacy, urban governance, and on the livelihoods of workers in the informal sector. He's also worked in the intersection of urban transport and law. He is a part of the campaign for the right to protest in Bangalore. Divya Narayanan has a background in public health and human rights and has worked in grassroots and the digital space for climate, public health, and social justice issues for over 12 years. She is the executive director at jhatka.org. This episode is adapted from an event that took place in the Bangalore International Centre in June of 2024.
So globally, historically, protests and campaigns and movements have often been a powerful instrument, not just on acquiring justice, but also for public awareness and spotlighting important issues. And India's freedom struggle is a prime example of that. In India, the liberty of expression is a constitutional right, and raising concerns, expressing dissent, and engaging in civil society movements and campaigns are fundamental to our democracy. We've seen hundreds of nonviolent movements, and they're often they often become disorderly when they are met with a certain amount of high-handedness and repression of some kind from the other side. So our systems and infrastructure are increasingly becoming opaque and specifically intolerant to public scrutiny. And today we're going to spend our time talking about how art plays a role in shaping public opinion and political discourse. So welcome to today's session. We're going to start off today with Vinay, Can you elaborate on the court ruling that Shubha was talking about earlier today? And is it a law? What standing does this law and ruling have? What protests does this law allow? And what are the consequences that dissenters face? And also in general, how is this ruling stifling protest? And what are some of the ramifications of this ruling?
One of my recent favorite Bangalore memories is, during the whole hijab time, we gathered at town hall and we sang, "Hum jabr ka nizam girane wale hai, hum ek naya samaj banane wale hai, hum inkilab hai, hum inkilab hai." We can't do this in town hall anymore. And many of you might remember Vidhan Sauda and sitting on the steps of Vidhan Sauda and eating corn or butta. It is not just eating corn or butta, but people have protested in Vidhan Sauda as well in the 80s, right? And in the 90s, the protest site moved from Vidhan Sauda to KR Circle, from there to Banapa Park, now to Freedom Park. In Freedom Park, which earlier was Central Jail, all dissent is now jailed over there. There's a parking lot in Freedom Park where we're supposed to gather and raise slogans, where nobody will see you because there's no pedestrians on that road, there's no traffic signal, so nothing will stop. So you can shout slogans, you can do whatever you want, and life moves on. We also heard that the protest site will be moved from the open parking lot of Freedom Park to a newly constructed closed parking lot. And they're saying protests have all facilities there. There are toilets, there's drinking water. So, you can go inside and protest, do whatever you want. We don't care. So how did this happen is something that we're here to discuss. In 2021, Anganwadi workers took out a rally in Bangalore. Anganwadi workers have a really important job of taking care of children from 0 to 6. And they're not even considered employees, right? And they were paid salary as low as 8,000 rupees. And they took out a rally saying that, we want our salaries to be hiked. 8,000 is not enough for us to take care of our families. Many of them gathered from across the state. And after that, you would have imagined that, the Karnataka High Court would have told the government, what is this? Why are people being paid below minimum wage? Instead, a sitting judge of the Karnataka High Court wrote to the High Court saying, this rally inconvenienced me and a lot of other people. So you need to bring in something to regulate these rallies and these protests because they're inconveniencing traffic. A city which adds 5 lakh cars a year, 10 lakh two-wheelers a year, is talking about a few hundred people fighting for justice for what the Constitution guaranteed them. And that was the situation. Then the High Court converted that letter into a suo motu PIL. And as that PIL was being heard, they passed an interim order which said, you can protest only in Freedom Park. So the High Court passed an interim order saying you can protest only in Freedom Park and you cannot have any rallies. As a result, what happened was the historic May Day rally, which workers and workers' unions undertake since independence and before, was not allowed. And not just that, because of that interim order, you could not protest anywhere. You had to go only to Freedom Park, and there were no rallies allowed. Even for the Karga procession, people had to go to High Court and say, can we undertake the Karga procession? Then they said, oh, this is a procession you can undertake. But the Pride March was not allowed in 2022. They said the Pride March, which is so historic, which is a celebration, you could not, undertake. And the important thing is, I'll get into the details later. While this hearing was happening, the then government got the police commissioner to pass a new order regulating protests. Right? Till then, from 2009, the police had an order which said that you just have to intimate the police for a protest, and you have to take permission to take a rally. But because of this High Court case was being heard, they passed a new order saying that you can do protests only in Freedom Park. And right now, what stands between us and a right to protest is only this police order, which they can withdraw at any point of time. But for some reason, this government is not withdrawn. I'll get into details later. But what has happened as a result of this? As a result of this, if you hold photos of watermelons and walk on Church Street, you'll face an FIR. Right? And you cannot protest anywhere. See, if street vendors have an issue in Sanjay Nagar, they cannot come to Freedom Park. Farmers in Devanhalli who protested land acquisition in Devanhalli had an FIR against them because they said you have to go to Freedom Park. Why will you come from Devanhalli to Freedom Park to protest? Right? And several citizens have local issues, like Malleshwaram had the local Sankey flyover. There are other people who had issues. You're not able to protest over there. Restriction is not only made it difficult to protest anywhere, it's also made overall showing dissent itself very difficult. And we'll get into the details later on. But Bangalore must remember the importance of protests. In 2016, Sumir is also here, he'll know, the union government brought a new rule saying that you cannot withdraw your PF till you turn 58. For garment workers, that was a huge blow. They all came out on the streets to protest. And because of the protest in Bangalore, the union government withdrew that national level law. That is the power of protest. In 2013 or 14, a woman commuter was raped in a BMTC bus. Then the Bangalore Bus Pranikara Vedike undertook protests, post which a women's safety committee was set up by BMTC. Paura Karmikas have been able to overthrow the contract system because they were able to protest and say that, this is unjust. So it is protests which lead to some level of justice. And without protest, the constitution, justice, these are only going to remain pipe dreams. And that's why it's so important to retain the right to protest, but more about it later.
Thank you, Vinay, for setting that context. And clearly, as we can see, it's not just protests, but also celebratory rallies like Pride that are being repressed at the moment. So we'll get into next, how does art try and change that? How can art play a role in activism in raising public consciousness? We'll start with Shilo.
As long as the sun and the moon exist in the sky, the name of our revolution shall exist. I was taught this nara by I think 11 or 12-year-old girl standing in the streets of Shaheen Bagh with tirangas painted on our cheeks. Shaheen was a very tense moment because as I was painting the mural there, we had gunshots in the background, the threat of mob violence pretty much every day. It was just in the run-up to the elections in Delhi and at the cusp of the Delhi riots. And I remember as we would walk in, we knew that there was going to be something that would happen because all of the lampposts would suddenly turn dark the day that an attack or a mob incident was going to occur. And as we were painting this mural, just as the scaffolding was coming down, after many days of feeling this very visceral fear in our bodies, a policeman came up to us. And at this point, me and my mom had actually already been detained by the police in Bangalore for protesting. And I thought, chalo, ab to pakde gaye. And the policeman, as the scaffolding was coming down, he said, "Maine zindagi mein itni khoobsurat cheez nahi dekhi hai. I've never seen something as beautiful like this in my life." And just like that, beauty transcended all kinds of borders. As we sat together looking at this temporal monument that we'd created on the streets with a police officer hugging protesters as we created it. Being at Shaheen Bagh, it was a reminder that art in South Asia is not additive to social justice movements. It's actually the spinal column of movements. It is our intergenerational lineage to stand on the shoulders of the poets like Tagore and Faiz Ahmad Faiz. And it wasn't a critical or an academic space. It was actually a space of possibility, a space of poetry, a space of a radical imagination of India. While Shaheen has been completely erased, this mural is actually the only thing that still exists there. The rest of it feels like a dream, like a mirage that never occurred. And yet this mural remains. And I think I have some theories about it, which I'll get into later. The work of Fearless is to turn up at moments of fear, war, of conflict, of resistance, and use art as a radical tool to shift imaginations from fear to visions of that safe and sacred future that we actually want to inhabit, the spaces that we want to step into. Very often I talk about how Fearless began, but actually today I want to share with you where Fearless has come and how far we've come. It feels like since those days at Shaheen Bagh, and then the beginning of the pandemic, as we remember, the first thing that the government did was to actually erase a lot of the graffiti at JNU and other universities and erase every sign of political protest art. But it really does feel as if we've been hurtled from one moment of fear to another, one emergency after another. Starting with working with essential workers, and Fearless actually did an entire kind of national tour by road as soon as the lockdown opened to work with communities who'd been most affected by the pandemic, all the way to finding ways to protest with and in solidarity with Dalit groups as the Hathras case happened, and we were not allowed to actually stand in solidarity with communities in protest. We actually painted this mural with the Dalit community that week that said, "My life mattered," in Ambedkar Blue in Delhi. All the way up to painting in Gota Gogama a couple of years ago following the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, where somehow I found myself with burning buses in the background and thousands of people taking over the streets in this utopic village that existed opposite the presidential palace there. And to a lot of our work that we're doing with Palestine right now, to the work that fearless ambassadors have done in Myanmar with the coup, as the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, which I'll also talk a little bit about earlier. And it feels like actually now Fearless's work is more relevant than it's ever been before, because the fear that we feel is actually very palpable, it's very real. But just to give you a sense of how our process works, we use healing, self-representation, self-determination with communities who are often made invisible as a form of storytelling, as a form of emotional alchemy. We radically take over public spaces as we're painting murals with these communities, or what I call public monuments with communities across the world. And in the process, the dialogue that occurs at these sites of these murals is very much a part of the core of the work that we do and the shift in the placemaking that we want to see. Our messaging is always affirmative, so we never speak against something. We actually speak for the safe and sacred futures that we want to inhabit. And finally, the monuments that we create, I believe, are almost portals to a world that doesn't even exist yet. But by having these visions of a future that we want, we know where we're stepping towards. Our movement is completely open source. So all our methodology is completely open source. So I'm building out now what I call the Fearless Sena, which is a task force of hundreds of artists and activists who are willing to turn up at moments of fear. And we've seen how with the far right, not only are they very emotional, not only are the narratives very compelling, but they're also extremely strategic and they work in scale. And so with a lot of what we've been thinking about with the Fearless movement is how do we really activate a scale? How do we create a counterforce, a task force across South Asia? So again, very quickly, we worked in countries across the world, from South Africa to working with Palestinian and Syrian refugees in Palestine, in Beirut, to working with transgender sex workers in Indonesia. But very quickly, I'm just going to tell you, what is really the beating heart of the Fearless project right now is the movement that we're creating. I think very often as artists, and especially as the daughter of an artist as well, we're taught that we need to live in ivory towers and be very individualistic about the way that we work. But I think one of the things that I've learned is that we do need scalable narrative shifts. And in order to do that, we do need to build out an army. This is a raging battle in a sense. And so one does need to actually create enough of a scale to be able to make, I guess, comprehensive narrative shifts in public opinion. So we have a program that we run called the Fearless Ambassador Program, where we train artists every year from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan. In our methodology, we fund them, we train them, we bring them together in different spaces across the world. And as we've been building out the Fearless Ambassador Program, we realized that actually while Fearless does inhabit this utopic space of possibility, actually the reality that artists face right now is probably more real than ever before and more dangerous than ever before. Two of the artists that I mentor, Chu and Zara, are both currently in exile in France. All Chu did was, she's this young Burmese artist, all she did was take pieces of paper out onto the streets and write protest slogans for people. She started a campaign called Right for Your Rights. And she ended up with a 30-year military sentence in Myanmar and had to be evacuated out of the country pretty much overnight. Another one of the artists that I mentor, Zara, a few weeks before the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, she had a feeling that something was going to happen because two of her friends were killed in a car bomb. They were both women artists. And so while she escaped when the Taliban did actually take over, her family was left behind, and Fearless evacuated a family of 7 from Afghanistan. And it was the most bizarre thing that I've ever done in my life, because I'm certainly not equipped for any kind of evacuation, but we did manage to get the family from Kabul to Mazar-e-Sharif and then onto a chartered flight to Macedonia and eventually to Canada. And doing that and kind of building out the Fearless movement, we have realized that it isn't enough even to just be a collective. It's certainly not enough to be an individual artist. It's also not enough to be a collective. But we needed to actually become into an institution that would create art in response to moments of fear, but also network, protect, resource the creation of political art across the world. So just to announce also in a very exciting new development that we have become Fearless Foundation for the Arts. And over the next few years, aside from building out the Fearless movement, which is the network, we are also entering into a space where we are willing to resource as well as protect the creation of political art across South Asia.
I would like to see the city as a site, Bangalore as a site, which has seen protests in different ways. The first one I would like to bring in is when Saket Raj was shot by the police. All of us were waiting in Kalakshetra, like Ravindra Kalakshetra, where Samsa Bayalu Ranga Mandira, where his body was to be brought after the postmortem. But the police just took it and burnt it, and his body was not brought. In a way, I would say that that site, which is a protest site, was completely cheated by the state, by the police. And then I wrote a poem for Saket. And when it was published, the footnote was removed. I would like to play this poem. It was sung by Sunita Ananthaswamy, and me collaborated, and she sung it.
ಹಾಡು ಬಿದ್ದಾಗ ಕುಸಿದು ತತ್ತರಿಸಿ ಹಾಡು ಬಿದ್ದಾಗ ಕುಸಿದು ತತ್ತರಿಸಿ ನೆಲ ಹರಿದಿತ್ತು ಕೆಂಪಗೆ ಹಾಡು ಬಿದ್ದಾಗ ಕುಸಿದು ತತ್ತರಿಸಿ ನೆಲ ಹರಿದಿತ್ತು.
Yeah, then again, when Gauri was shot, the entire city became a site of protest. Nobody could stop it. The whole city became a site of protest. There were thousands of people who landed in Bangalore for this protest, and I wrote a song which was sung by Vasu Dikshit and Bindu Malini. Yeah.
ಧಡ 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 ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು ಧಡ ಧಡ ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು ಒಂದಲ್ಲ ಎರಡಲ್ಲ ಸಾಲಾಗಿ ಏಳು ಒಂದಲ್ಲ ಎರಡಲ್ಲ ಸಾಲಾಗಿ ಏಳು ತೂರಿದ್ದು ಗೌರಿಗೆ ತಾಕಿದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮೆದೆಗೆ ತೂರಿದ್ದು ಗೌರಿಗೆ ತಾಕಿದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮೆದೆಗೆ ಧಡ ಧಡ ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು ಧಡ ಧಡ ಇಸಿ ಗುಂಡು ಹರಿ.
In a way, poetry is a tool for me, in the sense, it's not that you always write a protest poem, but that's the junctures of socio-political nuances make you write these. I keep these poems as junctures of protest history of Bangalore. Then came the CAA and NRC, where I decided to translate Fayaz Ahmed Fayaz's Hum Dekhenge. And even Gauri's poem, it just went viral everywhere. And these poems, I ultimately forgot that I was the one who wrote, And people in nooks and corners of Karnataka started singing. Pallavi and Bindu sang this poem, and I would like to bring this. And the Tamil translation was based on the Kannada This is the first time that this poem was sung in front of town hall, and people joined us in singing. And after singing, they wanted us to sing it again. Yeah. So then it was like me, Salma, who's a Tamil poet, and Anita Thampi, Malayalam poet. Three of us are very good friends. We always wanted to go somewhere and spend some time. This we have been telling since past 10 years or 15 years. We never did that. But we went to Shaheen Bagh, all three of us. When we went to Shaheen Bagh, that day they had blocked and you should not do any protests. But the people from Shaheen Bagh just took us, brought the mics, and we spoke, we sang, and quickly we were taken from there and protected. And we also learned that T.M. Krishna had already gone and sung versions of Hum Dekhenge from the south, Kannada, Tamil, and Malayalam versions of Hum Dekhenge. So the poems and the translation of the poems, when Hum Dekhenge was translated, it was certain changes I had made. And Tamil was based on my translation. And this is the next thing I would like to show. The first slide is, again, Song Slaughter, written for Saket. Recently, it was shown in One Shanti Road. The second one was a performance which was done in Sri Lanka. These are the past, when there was series of killing of people, both in India and Sri Lanka. So 3 young poets were made to stand in front of the passport covers, and there was a cut around that where the body fell. And within that, they wrote the poems. And that as well, it was also a kind of a performance where one of my poems was translated into Tamil and also Sinhala. So we put the mosquito nets on which this was written. All 3 people could come and stitch it. By the end of it, like it was Tamil, Kannada and Sinhala was merged. So there is so much of gap between all the 3. Kaveri, Tamil and Kannada fight that happens here. Sinhala and Tamil issues through the languages. And this was a performance I did it was done in London, but it was all about not letting words spill on the streets. These kinds of things I have designed and I have performed all through. And in Bangalore during CAA, when everything went like Hum Dekhenge, Now Nodona, just went viral, where I saw people who knew Kannada, who did not know Kannada, were singing it in villages everywhere, and it was amazing. And at some point of time, we didn't even know where the poem was going. And see, what I'm trying to say is, it's not just something that happens here, internationally you need to be sensitive. And that corner is a Crossbone Center in London, where there is a park in which bodies of people are buried, like only the deceased women, prostitutes, the so-called, and poets were not allowed inside the church. Their bodies were buried in that place. And now it is a cultural center. And every time I go to London, I would like to go and perform there. And this again is a poster from a collaboration between India and England, UK. The poet, he is an activist, and somehow we have translated each other's poems. And in 2014, we traveled India. 2015, we traveled England. So after all this, as a poet, as an academic, as a translator, now, as Vinay had told, everything is pushed to Freedom Park. In Freedom Park, we did a protest during hijab and halal issues, and we all went to Bangalore, and we did a huge walk. And before that, there was this, and I wrote an article about the entire dissent that took place and that got published. It's not just within somewhere. It's very essential for us to speak about it, talk about it, and make people sensitive and active. There is so much, maybe I will do it. And the protest against lynching, halal, hijab, and controversies against the right-wing strategies, we lost all the sites, and we were pushed to the Freedom Park. But even there, we have been working on it.
Thank you so much, Mamta and Shilo. Now we're going to go to talking about essentially from expression to mobilization, right? So how do we get more and more people to participate despite the restrictions? So here's a question for you, Vinay. How willing are people to participate in expressing dissent publicly? And have you seen this attitude changing over time?
I think there are a lot of people still willing to protest. In spite of the Freedom Park restriction, people are ready to stand at town hall, stand everywhere else. Among the younger people, there's definitely a lot more readiness. But after the Freedom Park restriction has come, every time you organize a protest, older people ask, have you taken permission? We want to be sure. The other thing I want to highlight is this rule has made it very difficult for marginalized communities to seek justice, right? So whether you're Muslim, if you're from the transgender community, whether from the Dalit community, you're already marginalized. And when there is an injustice, if you want to protest it, the only avenue is Freedom Park. Last year, the DSS and other groups took a rally from railway station to Freedom Park in support of internal reservation, and they faced an FIR. In MG Road, we just wanted to distribute pamphlets, and there is an FIR, and most of those named are Muslim, right? So while the majority gathered there were not Muslim, the FIR has mostly Muslim names. So what I'm trying to say is that while people are ready, people still want to do it, it is going to become difficult. And which is why the Horatad Hakkigagi Janandolana, we've been campaigning for the right to protest. The Constitution, after all, in Article 19 says, we have the freedom of speech and expression, and also the right to peaceful assembly. And this Freedom Park restriction is an absolute assault on that right. So I'd say that if you're going to keep doing this, it's going to become difficult, right? So people who've just seen Bangalore in the last 3-4 years, they might think that protests only happen in Freedom Park. And the city will soon lose its memories, right? There are already very few people who know that you could protest in Vidhan Sauda, or you could protest in KR Circle. And if you lose this memory, that creates a huge democratic deficit. And which is something that we need to take care, and which is why people are even today ready to put their bodies in line and say, we don't want to do this in Freedom Park. Which is why when Manipur happened, people gathered at Town Hall. There is an FIR. And so many of us have like more than one FIR now, just in the last 1 year, because of this Freedom Park rule, which is what we need to fight against.
So I have a follow-up question on that. So how do you see attitudes changing among younger people? How can we go about doing that and encouraging them to step out among, when we have this sort of fear around us?
Like I said, younger people want to be out on the streets. And especially youngsters in Bangalore have been, if you see the Palestine movement across universities in the last 2 months, it's taken off. But here in Bangalore, for holding a watermelon placard, you had an FIR. So, youngsters are feeling like, it's going to be very difficult. But what we can do is, one, we need to pressurize the current government to withdraw this rule. If the police commissioner just changes the order, or if they roll back to the 2009 order, this Freedom Park restriction will go. The other thing is, we need to have numbers, and older people also need to step up and say, okay, we are there with you. If there is an FIR, if there is something, we are going to be there with you. We need to put pressure on the government to close the FIRs which are already there, right? They can file a B report. In the cabinet, they can pass a resolution. People who've given hate speeches have had cases withdrawn. People who rioted have had cases withdrawn. Why are people who just wanted to, give out pamphlets have cases against them? And wasn't Manipur a national tragedy? Did it not require that, we come to town hall and say that, this is wrong and that you can't do this? Why are those cases continuing? We need to put pressure on the government to withdraw those cases. And that's what is going to make it safer. But one thing is, we all need to come out more often. We need to hit the street. It's really okay. If we don't hit the street now, it's going to become like Delhi, because in Delhi after Shaheen Bagh, the pogrom happened and it's just become very difficult. If you're not going to come out and hit the streets and do creative things, it'll happen. I'll just tell one thing which we did from the Street Vendors Union, and then I'll close. The Street Vendors Union, like I said, they were given ID cards in 2018, which expired in 2023. And the BBMP, in spite of several reminders, didn't bother to renew it. And police started harassing, saying your ID cards have expired. And if you protest in Freedom Park, nobody will see. So the street vendors had to gather in BBMP, which is the actual site. So what the union did was, around 500, 600 vendors took individual letters to the commissioner and said, renew my license. So we all gathered there, and the cops came. They said, we're going to put an FIR. But we said, this is not a protest. We all got our individual letters, and we are gathered here, and we want to give this. So we were able to, give speeches there, talk there. You have to keep doing creative things like that, because, but my message is, come out, occupy the streets, come to the road, do something, read a poem. Poetry is really important, art is really important, paint on the walls, do graffiti, whatever it is, we have to keep coming out and doing it.
On that note, Mamta, we've seen how art has been great to highlight issues and also spreading awareness. So how can it be used to mobilize the public to participate more actively, especially when we have this whole atmosphere of fear and apathy?
I have a group called Kavya Sanjay, which I started. And they're all youngsters and people from different languages, not just Kannada. Most of the time, I bring in translation as an activity where, we have been translating people from contemporary poets from all over the world. Like Slovenian activist poet who's a gay poet has been translated into Kannada. And another lesbian activist has been translated into Kannada. Poets from Nicaragua, poets from Latin America, poets from Spain, who are activists like us are all translated into Kannada. In a way, by this translation, it's not their poetry. It also answers what is happening here. So poetry is a very powerful tool which has to be used carefully and which can be used, and we read it everywhere. Maybe, we won't read our poems. We also read our poems, blend it with that, and read it everywhere. So Kavya Sanjay is known in Bangalore, where we bring in people, like we bring in singers, we bring in writers, we bring in all kind of people writing in different languages. And also, we are very active. So that is one thing. And what I feel is, you also involve not just in poetry, like 377, we did a workshop with the community, and help them understand it in Kannada. And it's important to embed this in our own practice. So once you embed this in our own practice, most of the young people in colleges and schools, don't have an exposure. So you speak about your practice, but you inform them about what is happening today. So that is very important as an artist, that you practice this in collaboration with people. So it's really important. So it also helps us to sensitize minds and communities, people, youngsters, and everything. I would now like to briefly read a little bit of recent translation of my poem into Kannada from Hindi. This is the Saheba, which was written during the elections, just before the elections. ಹ್ಯಾಂಗೆ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಆಹಾ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಗಡಗಡ ಗಡಗಡ ನಡಗಿದ್ದೆ ಕುರ್ಚಿ ಧರ್ಮನ್ನ ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಇಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಪಟಪಟ ಅಂತಾನೆ ನೋಡಿ 100ಕ್ಕೆ 90 ಸುಳ್ಳ. ರಾಮನಾಮದ ಸುಳ್ಳು ಲಗಾಮು ಹಿಡಿದು ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಲೂಟಿ. ಕಾಸಿಂದ ಏಳಬಾರದಕ್ಕೆ ಜನ ಎಲ್ಲ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆನೂ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಆಹಾ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಮುಳ್ಳು ತಂತಿ ಎಳೆದು ಗಡಿಗಳ ಹುಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಊರನ್ನಟ್ಟ ನಡುವೇನೆ. ತಪ್ಪೇ ಮಾಡಿದವರ ಗುಂಡಿಕ್ಕಿ ಕೊಲ್ತ್ಕೊಂಡವರು ಕುಂಟ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಗೊಡವೇನೆ. ನಕ್ಷೆನ ಹರಕೊಂಡು ಚೀನಾ ಅವರಿಂದ ಮರೆಯಾಗಿ ತಿರ್ತಾನೆ. ಹ್ಯಾಗೆ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಗಡಗಡ ಗಡಗಡ ನಡುಗಿದ್ದ ಕುರ್ಚಿ ಧರ್ಮನ ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ತರ್ತಾನೆ. ಇವರನ್ನ ಒಡೆದು ಅವರನ್ನ ಜೋಡಿಸಿ, ಇವರನ್ನ ಒಡೆದು ಅವರನ್ನ ಜೋಡಿಸಿ ಒಡೆಯೋ ರಾಜ್ಯಭಾರ. ಜಾತಿ ಧರ್ಮವ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಆಳುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಹರಿದು ಹಂಚಿಟ್ಟು ಜಾತಿ ಧರ್ಮವ ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಆಳುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಯಾರೇ ಇವನನ್ನ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡಿದರು ಅವರನ್ನ ಜೈಲಿಗೆ ತಳ್ತಾನೆ. ಆಹಾ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಹ್ಯಾಂಗೆ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಸಾಹೇಬನ ಸಿಂಹಾಸನ ಅಳುಗೋ ದಿನವೂ ಬಂದೇ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಗೆಲ್ಲುತ್ತೆ ಜನತೆ ದೇಶದ ತುಂಬ ಕೀರ್ತಿ ಪತಾಕೆ ಹಾರುತ್ತೆ. ಬದಲಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಕಾಲವೂ ಕೂಡ ಅನ್ನೋ ಸೂಚನೆ ಕಾಣುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಸುಧಾರಿಸುತ್ತೆ ಕಾಲವೂ ಕೂಡ ಅನ್ನೋ ಸಾಚನೆ ಕಾಣುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಹ್ಯಾಗೆ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ. ಆಹಾ ಆಹಾ ಬೆಚ್ಚಿದ ಸಾಹೇಬ ಮಾತು ಮಾತಿಗೂ ಹೆದರುತ್ತಾನೆ.
Thank you, Mamta. That was beautiful. Shilo, with Fearless, you're trying to build a movement, right? And building a movement involves getting the message across to the audience. But while being an artist and an activist as well, how do you ensure you preserve the aesthetics of your art while also making it relatable and accessible?
So with Fearless, I guess to begin with, my practice as an artist, I feel like is quite separate from the way that I relate to Fearless, because Fearless is less about being concerned with the aesthetics, and it is more about beauty and access to beauty. And for me, that beauty is not just the aesthetic experience, it's also seeing Dalit women dancing in the streets in front of one of our murals, or doing dabke on the streets of London right now with the Palestinian youth movement. For me, that beauty and that access is something that I believe we always had. So we do need more creative forms to be able to not just dissent, but actually ascend. I feel like that is what art does, is that it transmutes whatever is the critical into the possible, in a sense. Particularly just speaking to how we mobilize community. thinking about all of the different ways that our ancestors did, like lifting salt out of water as an act of protest, or even just Ambedkar drinking water as an act of protest. Very recently, we were at COP28 in Dubai, which was horrible, for the record. And, it was an incredibly weird co-opted space sponsored by Coca-Cola and Shell and whatnot. And yet it is a very important space because there is a lot of diplomatic conversations that are happening there. And as we found ourselves there, the ceasefire ended, and we weren't able to protest there at all, obviously, because we were in the UAE, but also the UN, despite the UN Blue Zone being kind of separate in terms of its legislation from the rest of the UAE, they made it nearly impossible to actually do any kind of action or protest there, because they would change the rules every day in order to, I suppose, appease the Israeli pavilion and the US pavilion that were there. So if one day the word ceasefire would be banned, the next day the word Gaza would be banned, the third day the word Palestine would be banned, then ceasefire now was allowed, but ceasefire was not allowed. It was like complete gaslighting, right, by the UN. And what we ended up doing was a very creative and in a sense a ritual performance. We applied for an action called Healing with Henna, and we were quite vague about it when we applied to the UN for it, which is why we got permission. And we had about 50 people write the names of people martyred in the genocide in Gaza on their hands in henna, looking at how in South Asia you put the name of a beloved on your hand. And we gathered about 150 people with this, like long hand-painted keffiyeh and walked through the streets of the Blue Zone and did a beautiful poetry reading where we read out Darwish and we read out Faiz, who had actually lived together in exile in Beirut and wrote poetry together in a beautiful red bar in Beirut. And we read out poetry as a form of protest, and we read out the names of those who had been martyred. So even though we stuck by all of the rules, at the threat of being deported and also debadged from Dubai, which actually, if there's any country I wouldn't mind being deported from, it's Dubai. We did find a way to be able to create actually a far more poetic intervention. And looking at the Palestinian crisis, it's been really interesting to even just see how the Fearless movement has been mobilized in and of itself. Within 2 weeks of the crisis beginning, we already had 40 to 50 artists send in beautiful posters. Those posters have now been pasted up across the streets of the world. They've been in Beirut, they've been in Berlin, they've been pasted up in Nepal and Sri Lanka. We've had a Fearless mural come up in solidarity. In Colombo, we've had a series of Fearless murals come up pretty much across South Asia through our network. And finally, we just painted a mural in solidarity with the student encampments. So this has been a really good example for us to really see the movement in action when there is a real-time moment of fear. How do we have different aspects of this movement, of this Fearless Sena, really find ways to be able to articulate what exists on the other side?
Question to you, Vinay, is you've been involved in pushing for the reversal of the High Court ruling. Do you have any updates for us on that? Is it being challenged in any other manner, and what can we expect?
Yeah, the most important thing is, right now, what stands between Bangalore and the right to protest is not the High Court order. Because the final High Court order clearly says protests and rallies are regulated by the Bangalore City Police's order. So what stands between us and now is only the Bangalore police order. So if you have friends in the government or in the police, we need to put pressure on the Home Minister and the police commissioner to say, reverse this order. Go back to 2009 order, where you had to intimate the police about a protest and take permission for a rally, right? Baba Saheb Ambedkar said, educate, agitate, organize. We can't agitate only in Freedom Park. He didn't say agitate only in one place. The Constitution doesn't say freedom of assembly only in Freedom Park. Right? So these are the things that we need to do now. So I'd also request people here to please join us in the Horatada Hakkigagi Janandolana. You can reach out to me or my colleagues Aishwarya and Purna here who are with the Horatada Hakkigagi Janandolana. We also have a note explaining the legality of it and explaining why the right to protest needs to come back. We've done a bunch of things, right? We had an open letter to the CM, which we submitted. Thousands of people signed that. We had a press meet about this. We've spoken to different MLAs about this. We even had a protest for the right to protest. And we didn't do it in Freedom Park. We did it near the Gandhi statue on October 2nd, and we were detained. And we have an FIR against us for that. So, whatever it is, we are willing to go out there, and we can assure you that we're not going to stop till we get back the right to protest. If we have to live our dreams of the preamble, we need to have the right to protest. Protest is an important check and balance in democracy, and we are going to continue this fight, and we'd request people to also please join us. This is not the fight of just a few people. This needs to be the fight of all of us. Hassan had become the Republic of Hassan because one family was not allowing any protests over there, and we've seen what happened now. And finally, now 7,000 people hit the street in Hassan. Bangalore cannot become like that. Bangalore cannot become draconian. Bangalore is not a city meant to be like that. This is a city meant to be alive with voices, with poetry, with art, with dissent. And therefore, please do join us and let's get back our right to protest. Thank you.
Mamta and then Shilo. Besides the ruling being overturned or challenged, what is the one thing that you wish for with regard to the right to dissent and public dissent in Bangalore?
I would like to decentralize the protest sites, which is not possible, what Vinay said. But, decentralize can happen in different ways. Maybe, some of us, including me, some of us who are thinking protest is needed and dissent is needed, we need to silently work. Maybe, I take my students to ALF, telling them that this is a place where you can know a little bit about law and order. And we speak there about various things. I take them to Vanshanti Road, do a workshop, writing workshop, like text and visual installation workshop, poetry installation workshops. And they are like, you tell them through your practice. And this little thing where decentralization has to happen, should happen by identifying people in small pockets within Bangalore and outside Bangalore. So there has to be a sensitivity kind of a spaces which can activate communities and groups. So I think, it's very, very essential for me as a writer, as a poet, as a translator. I have been doing this. I'm only known as a poet and translator. Hardly nowadays people also have realized that I'm also doing some activism. So I never say that, I keep quiet. I say that I'm a poet and a translator, and I make everyone give the themes, give the context, ask them to respond, ask them to write, ask them to respond to people, poets from Palestine, poets from small European countries which is going through horrible time, and various things, Poets from Africa, poets from everywhere. Sri Lanka, I took a team of Kavya Sanjay to Sri Lanka. So it's very essential how we go about this to retain this.
One wish. Wow, I feel like the work of Fearless is actually to put wishes of communities into public spaces, like I said, to create these portals. But I think right now, as Fearless is going into this new phase of institution building, like I said, we're becoming a foundation for the arts that will protect political art, network political artists, fund and resource the creation of political art, and also create our own work as a creative institution. I think in many ways, I feel like the art world has failed us because there are no institutions in the art world that will actually even allow for the creation of any kind of political art, or to even forget political art, even a reflection of what's actually happening in our society. I remember walking through India Art Fair a couple of years ago and just feeling like as if I was, right after the pandemic, this is the first, art fair after lockdowns, and feeling as if I was walking through a graveyard. I was like, have people not lived through what we've lived through? Have people not seen what has happened in the last couple of years? So I think my wish is actually for artists and art institutions to be able to realize that it is deeply, deeply important and vital for us to be a reflection of what's happening, to make the invisible visible through our art. Yeah. And I hope that Fearless Foundation becomes that, actually.
I would like to add just one little bit, that we as artists, and activists, we can never work in isolation. It's very important to collaborate. Collaborate with musicians, collaborate with activists, collaborate with painters, collaborate with whatever art is there, whatever activism is there. Keep your eyes and heart open And it's very important to do the collaborative work.
Just to add to that also, just the collaborative aspect of this, as we're going out into this phase of saying that we're going to protect political artists, right? Now, as an artist, I don't know how to protect. I don't know what the legal rights of are. When we got Zara's family out of Afghanistan, which was a miracle in its own way, I received a list of 200 artists who were seeking exile, and I didn't really know what to do. And this is where it does become very important for us to be able to work with lawyers, for us to be able to work with people who are writing policy, people who understand evacuations, so that we can actually, we don't live single issue lives, so we can't build single issue movements, and I think it's very important for us to come together.
Yeah, just in terms of collaboration, for example, Bahutwa Karnataka always calls upon Kavya Sanjay to come read poetry at the protests because it's really vital. And, you can have pamphlets, you can make a speech, but poetry and song connects with people like nothing else, right? And I think our friend Vinay Kumar is also here, who's made hand-painted banners. When certain MP spoke about puncture walas, he made a banner which said, puncture hate with love. And that was also held up recently, right? And so painting banners with the hand, placards with the hand, poetry, all of these are important. And also, I also want to give a call out to more lawyers, if any lawyers are in the audience, that we need more lawyers who do this kind of work. Because like Shilo is saying or Mamta is saying, we need to collaborate, we need to work together, and we also need to protect artists, and we will. Because, without art, without love, there's no revolution, and that's what we're here to do.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you like what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarunaraj and Raghu Tenkaila. Artwork is designed by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.